"I pity you," said Miss Beatrice Thorne to the most feared man in 3 counties, and the whole dinner table stopped breathing. The Duke of Ravensworth set down his wine very slowly. He was not a man accustomed to being pitied. He was accustomed to being feared, obeyed, flattered, and, by the more ambitious mammas of the district, pursued, but pitied, at his own neighbor's dinner table, by a penniless vicar's daughter, with ink on her cuffs and no fortune to her name, was an entirely new experience, and he found, to his considerable annoyance, that he could not immediately think how to answer it. "You pity me," he repeated. "I do." Beatrice Thorne did not drop her eyes. She was 26, which the district considered nearly on the shelf. She was clever, which the district considered nearly a disease, and she had just been informed by the Duke of Ravensworth, in the course of a discussion about the education of the poor, that a woman's opinions on matters of policy were as ornamental and as useful as a spaniel reciting Greek. She had smiled at him, a bright, dangerous smile that her father the vicar knew well and dreaded, and she had said the thing about pity, and now the table was silent, and her father had put his face in his napkin, and the evening, which had been merely dull, had become a catastrophe. "Perhaps," said the Duke, with the icy courtesy that had made grown men leave rooms, "you would be good enough to explain your pity, Miss Thorne. I confess it is not an emotion I had expected to inspire in a young woman of your situation." He meant the word to wound. Her situation. Poor, unmarried, dependent, small. He watched to see it land. It did not land. Beatrice Thorne only tilted her head, as though he had said something mildly interesting, and answered him in a clear, carrying voice that reached every fascinated ear at the table. "I pity you, Your Grace, because you have just made a very clever remark about a spaniel and Greek, and you are so accustomed to everyone laughing that you did not notice that it was not, in fact, clever. It was merely cruel, and cruelty is what unclever people reach for when they wish to seem clever and cannot manage it. I pity you because you are, by every account, one of the best-read men in England, and you have chosen to use that great education to inform a room full of your inferiors that they are your inferiors, which is a thing they already knew, and which required no education at all to say. And I pity you most of all, Your Grace, because you are clearly a man of considerable intelligence, who has been surrounded his whole life by people too frightened of your rank to ever once tell you when you are being tiresome. And there is nothing in this world so lonely, or so stunting, as a clever person whom no one has ever dared to disagree with. You have the finest mind in the county, and the manners of a spoilt child, and the tragedy of it is that you cannot tell the difference, because no one has ever loved you enough to risk telling you. That is why I pity you. Now, will you have the salt? You seem to have salted nothing, and you have been glaring at me for so long that your soup has gone quite cold." There was a silence at the table of a quality Beatrice's father would describe to his wife, later, as like the silence after a cannon, before you know whether you still have all your limbs. And then the Duke of Ravensworth did a thing that no one at that table had ever seen him do, and that several of them would still be describing on their deathbeds. He laughed. It came out of him startled and unwilling, and entirely genuine. A real laugh, rusty from disuse, cracking clean across his own carefully maintained ice, and it transformed his whole severe dark face so completely that the vicar's wife made an audible sound of astonishment. The Duke of Ravensworth laughed, at his own dinner table, at a joke made entirely at his expense, and when he had recovered himself, he looked at Beatrice Thorne with an expression that had, alarmingly, stopped being cold at all. "The salt," he said. "Yes, thank you, Miss Thorne. I find I will have the salt after all." She passed it. Their eyes met over the little silver dish, and something happened in that look that neither of them would have admitted to under torture. A spark, a recognition, the particular electric attention of two clever people who have just discovered, across a boring dinner table, that they have finally met someone worth arguing with. "You are," the Duke said, "the rudest woman I have ever met." "You are," Beatrice returned, "the rudest man I have ever met. And I once met a bishop who told my father the poor were poor because God found them tedious. You have real competition, Your Grace. but I think you may hold the title. I have held a great many titles, none so richly earned as this one." He very nearly laughed again. She saw him fight it. And Beatrice Thorne, who had walked into this dinner, resigned to a dull evening of being condescended to, walked out of it 3 hours later, in a state of profound and irritated confusion, because the most feared and disagreeable man in 3 counties had, over the course of the fish and the game and the pudding, argued with her about the education of the poor, the merits of the modern novel, the character of Bonaparte, and the proper management of a home farm. Argued with her as an equal, listened to her answers, conceded 2 points, and pressed her hard on a third. And she had enjoyed it more than any conversation she had had in years, and she was furious about it, because a sensible woman does not enjoy the company of an arrogant duke, and Beatrice Thorne had always prided herself on being sensible above all things. The Duke of Ravensworth rode home under the cold stars in a similar state of confusion, though he would have described it differently. He had gone to the Fentons' dinner because one must occasionally dine with one's neighbors, and he had expected to be bored, and he had been bored, right up until a plain, sharp-tongued young woman in a made-over gown had told him she pitied him, and then explained, with devastating precision, exactly why. No one had spoken to him so in his adult life. No one had dared. And the Duke of Ravensworth, who was indeed one of the best-read and loneliest men in England, and who had begun to suspect somewhere around his 33rd year that his rank had walled him into a solitude so complete that he might live and die without one honest word spoken to his face. The Duke of Ravensworth rode home, realizing that the most alive he had felt in a decade had been the moment a penniless vicar's daughter looked him dead in the eye and told him his soup was cold. He should, he told himself, be offended. He was not offended. He was, God help him, delighted. And he was already, before he had reached his own gates, thinking of 3 things he wished he had said, and looking forward, actually looking forward, like a boy, to the next time he might have the chance to say them. The trouble with a small country district is that clever people cannot avoid one another, and the Duke of Ravensworth and Miss Beatrice Thorne, having discovered they were the 2 cleverest and most disagreeable people in it, now found themselves flung together at every turn. They met at church, where the Duke, who had not been observed at Sunday service in living memory, suddenly began to attend with great regularity, and to linger in the churchyard afterward, ostensibly to speak with the vicar about the roof fund, and actually to provoke the vicar's daughter into an argument, which he managed with an ease that the vicar found both baffling and faintly alarming. They met at the Fentons again, and the Bellinghams, and at every dinner and card party in the district, because the whole neighborhood, having heard the story of the pity, now issued invitations to both of them in the confident expectation of entertainment, and were rarely disappointed. And they argued. Oh, how they argued. They argued about everything, and nothing, about poetry and turnips, and the French, and the poor rate, and whether Miss Austen's novels would be read in 50 years. Beatrice said yes. The Duke said no. The Duke was wrong, and he would live to know it. And their arguments became, over the golden weeks of that autumn, the chief entertainment of the district, and the secret sustenance of both their lives. For here is the thing that neither of them said, and both of them knew, that a fight, between 2 people who are truly matched, is one of the most intimate things in the world. To argue well with someone, you must listen to them completely. You must take their mind seriously enough to oppose it. You must care what they think, enough to want to change it. Every barbed exchange between the Duke and the vicar's daughter was, though they would both have denied it hotly, a form of the closest attention 2 human beings can pay each other. And they were both starving, she for a mind that would not condescend to her, he for a voice that would not flatter him. And they fed each other, across dinner tables and churchyards, and the length of many a country drawing-room, and called it dislike. The district, of course, saw it before they did. The district always does. "They will marry," said old Mrs. Bellingham to Mrs. Fenton, over the teacups, watching the Duke and Miss Thorne quarrel savagely about the corn laws by the window. "Look at them. No 2 people ever fought like that who were not desperately in love. Mark me, there will be a wedding by spring." "He is a duke," said Mrs. Fenton, "and she has 40 pounds a year and a sharp tongue." "He is a lonely, brilliant, badly brought-up man," said Mrs. Bellingham, who was old enough to say what she liked, and she is the first person in his whole life who has treated him like an equal instead of an idol or an ogre. He will marry her or he will be a fool. And whatever else that man is, he is not a fool. Watch. But there was a difficulty, and the difficulty was Beatrice's pride, which was every bit the equal of the Duke's, and considerably better founded. Because Beatrice Thorne knew exactly what she was, in the eyes of the world. A poor vicar's spinster daughter, 26, without fortune or beauty or connection. And she knew exactly what the Duke of Ravensworth was, the greatest match in the county, pursued by every heiress in 3 shires. And she had constructed, out of these 2 hard facts, an absolute and load-bearing conviction that whatever this was between them, this arguing, this attention, this dangerous warm thing that had begun to happen in her chest whenever his carriage appeared in the lane, it could not, would not, must not be love, because a duke did not love a woman like her, and to imagine for one moment that he might was to set herself up for a humiliation she was far too proud and far too sensible to risk. So she did the thing clever, proud, frightened women do. She got there first. She decided, in advance, that he could not possibly mean anything by his attentions, and she armored herself accordingly, and she made very sure to be at her most cutting, exactly when she felt herself most in danger of softening, when the Duke said something that reached her. And he had begun, as the weeks went on, to say things that reached her, quiet things, in between the arguments, things that showed her he had been thinking about her mind and her circumstances and her worth in a way no one else ever had. She would turn it aside with a joke, or a barb, or a brisk change of subject, because to let it in would be to hope, and she had decided long ago that hope, for a woman in her situation, was simply a slower way of being hurt. And the Duke of Ravensworth, who was learning, painfully, that being clever is no protection at all against being a coward in matters of the heart, saw her do it, and mistook it. He mistook her armor for indifference. He, who had never in his life had to woo anyone, who had only ever had to permit himself to be pursued, found himself for the first time wanting a woman who gave him nothing but arguments, showing his interest in the only clumsy ways he knew, and being met, every time, with a wall of wit as high and hard as his own. And he began to despair. He began to think that she truly did feel only what she had first announced, pity, and a certain sporting enjoyment of a good fight, and nothing warmer underneath it at all. 2 proud, clever, lonely people, each convinced the other could not possibly love them, each too frightened to risk the words, arguing brilliantly across a country autumn, while the whole district waited for them to see what was under their own noses. It could not go on, and it was the Duke in the end who broke it, badly, at first, in the way that proud people break things. There was one afternoon, before it all went wrong, that Beatrice would hold on to for the rest of her life, the afternoon she understood, for the first time, what she was truly dealing with, and why she could not, however hard she tried, stop caring. It was raining, and she had been caught in it walking back from a sick parishioner's cottage, and the Duke's carriage had come upon her in the lane, and he had, against every rule of propriety, insisted on taking her up and driving her home, and then, because the rain had become a downpour, had brought her instead to Ravensworth to wait it out, with his housekeeper installed as chaperone, and a great fire built up in the library. And it was the library that undid her. She had known he was a reading man. She had not known this. Room upon room of books, floor to ceiling, thousands upon thousands of them, more books than she had seen in the whole of her life. And the Duke of Ravensworth, moving among them, not as a man who owned them, but as a man who had read them, who reached without looking for the exact volume he wanted, who had marked and worn and loved them, and who watched Beatrice's face as she took it in with an expression of such naked, hopeful vulnerability that she scarcely knew him. "You have read these," she said. "All of them, haven't you?" "There is not a great deal else to do," the Duke said, "when one is feared. People do not call, one reads." He said it lightly, but she heard the thing underneath it, and it went into her like a hook. "I have had a great deal of time, Miss Thorne, and very little company. The books have been my company. They do not care that I am a duke. Neither, I have noticed, do you. It is the same quality, I think. You and Mr. Johnson and Mr. Hume are the only three who have ever spoken to me as though I were merely a man with a mind. And two of the three are dead, and the third tells me my soup is cold. He drew down a volume and turned it in his hands, not looking at her. I did not know, until I met you, how starved I was for it. It is an uncomfortable thing to learn at 35, that one has been lonely one's whole life and mistook it for being superior. I have you to thank for the discovery. I am not sure whether to thank you or resent you for it. Chiefly, I find I only want to be in the room where you are, saying what you think, because it is the one place in all my life where I have ever felt entirely awake. Beatrice Thorne stood among 10,000 books with the rain on the windows, and understood, with a lurch of the heart she could not afford, that the arrogant man the whole county feared was in fact the loneliest person she had ever met, and that his arrogance was not the opposite of that loneliness, but the wall he had built around it, and that she, fatally, had been let inside the wall and did not want to leave. She said something light back, because she had to, because to answer him truly would have been to fall the rest of the way, and she had one scrap of self-protection left and clung to it. But she drove home in the clearing evening knowing that she was lost, and that the only question left was how much it would cost her, and she was right to be afraid, because the answer, when it came on the Bellingham's terrace, would nearly cost her everything. It happened at the Bellingham's harvest ball, which the Duke of Ravensworth attended for the sole and unadmitted purpose of seeing Beatrice Thorne, and which Beatrice attended in her third best gown, with the firm intention of enjoying herself and not thinking about the Duke of Ravensworth at all, an intention she abandoned within 4 minutes of his arrival. They found each other, as they always did. They argued about the militia and about Mr. Coleridge, and about whether it was possible for a sensible person to enjoy dancing. The Duke said no. Beatrice said he only said so because he could not do it. The Duke, stung, proved her wrong by dancing with her, and did it beautifully. And neither of them spoke a word through the whole of it, because both of them had discovered that being in each other's arms in silence was far more dangerous than any argument, and neither could think how to survive it. And afterward, flushed and undone, and frightened by the silence of the dance, the Duke of Ravensworth drew Beatrice out onto the Bellingham's terrace in the cold October dark, and he did the thing he had been building toward for 2 months, and he did it wrong. He did it as a duke. That was his mistake. He had never in his life had to ask for anything. He had only had to bestow. And so, standing on the moonlit terrace, with the one woman who had ever made him feel like a living man, he reached, in his terror, in his pride, in his total ignorance of how these things are done between equals, for the manner of a duke conferring a favor. "Miss Thorne," he said, "you cannot have failed to notice my attentions these past weeks. I will be direct, as you value directness. I have decided to marry you. I am aware of the disparity in our situations. You have no fortune, no rank, no connection, and I am who I am, and I want you to understand that I have weighed all of that, and that I am prepared to overlook it. Your wit and your character are sufficient recommendation. I find I would rather have your conversation than any heiress's 30,000 pounds. It is a very great thing I am offering you, and I do not doubt your good sense will see it. You will be the Duchess of Ravensworth. I can hardly imagine you will refuse." He waited. He had, God forgive him, expected gratitude. He had expected the bright, difficult woman to be, for once, made speechless, pleasantly this time, by the magnitude of what he laid at her feet. He watched, instead, the warmth go out of Beatrice Thorne's face like a candle pinched out, and something cold and terrible and proud come into it in its place, and he understood, one fatal instant too late, that he had made the single worst mistake of his life. "You have decided to marry me," she repeated, very quietly. "You are prepared to overlook my situation. You cannot imagine I will refuse. Beatrice, let me be certain I understand the honor you do me, your grace." Her voice was steady, but he could hear, underneath it, something that had been wounded to the very bone. "You have looked at me, at my mind, my character, the whole of the person you claim to value, and you have weighed it, like a man weighing a horse, against the fortune and the rank I do not possess. and you have graciously concluded that despite my many deficiencies, you are willing to overlook what I am and confer yourself upon me. You have decided. You did not ask. It did not occur to you to ask, because it did not occur to you that my answer was in any doubt. Because a duke does not ask, a duke informs, and I am to be so overwhelmed by my good fortune that I fall gratefully at your feet. Have I understood you, your grace? Have I understood the offer correctly? That is not. Beatrice, you are twisting my words. I am repeating your words. A tear had escaped, and she dashed it away furiously, hating it, hating that he had made her cry. Do you know, your grace? For 2 months I let myself do a very foolish thing. I let myself begin to believe that you saw me, truly saw me. Not the vicar's poor daughter, not the spinster with 40 pounds a year, but me, the person, the mind, the woman. Because you argued with me as though my thoughts mattered, and no one had ever done that, and I was fool enough to think it meant you had stopped seeing my situation and started seeing me. And now you stand on this terrace and tell me that you have been seeing my situation the whole time, that it has been sitting there in the scales the entire 2 months, being weighed and overlooked and generously forgiven, and that your great love, your grand proposal, is at bottom an act of charity from a superior to an inferior, a favor I am too poor to refuse. You have not asked me to be your wife, your grace. You have offered to rescue me from my smallness, and you have expected me to be grateful, and in doing so, you have told me, more clearly than any cruelty could, that you never once thought of me as your equal at all. You are my equal, the Duke said, and there was real anguish in it now, the pride cracking, the terror showing through. Beatrice, you are the only equal I have ever met. That is the whole of why I— Then why, she said, did you weigh my situation? An equal has no situation to overlook. You do not marry down to an equal. You simply marry her, and count yourself lucky, and it would never once cross your mind to mention the disparity, because there would be no disparity. There would only be 2 people, matched, choosing each other. You did not offer me that. You offered me a rescue and a favor, and a great condescending honor, and I would rather stay a spinster on 40 pounds a year for the whole of my life than be any man's act of charity, even yours, especially yours, because you, of all people, should have known better. I told you at the first, the trouble with you, that no one has ever loved you enough to tell you when you are being a fool. I loved you enough. I am telling you now. You are being a fool, your grace, the greatest fool in 3 counties, and you have just thrown away the one thing your rank could never buy you. And I hope you are clever enough, someday, to understand exactly what you did on this terrace. Good night. And Beatrice Thorne walked back into the Bellingham's ballroom with her chin high and her heart in pieces, and left the Duke of Ravensworth alone in the cold, holding the wreckage of a proposal he had been so sure of, understanding, slowly, horribly, completely, that she had been right about all of it, that she had loved him, that she had said so, in the same breath in which she refused him, and that he had lost her not despite his rank, but because he had reached for it, because at the one moment in his life, when he most needed to be simply a man, asking a woman to love him, he had hidden, like a coward, behind his coronet. He had, at last, been told he was a fool by someone who loved him enough to say it. It was exactly what he had needed his whole life, and it had cost him her. And he stood on the terrace and thought that he had never in all his lonely years understood the meaning of the word until this moment. Nor was he the only one who did not sleep. Beatrice Thorne lay awake in her narrow bed in the vicarage that night, and told herself, with great firmness, that she had done the right thing. She had. She knew she had. A woman who accepted a proposal framed as a favor, taught the man who offered it that she could be had cheaply, and would spend the rest of her life being reminded of the bargain. She had seen it happen to other women. She had watched pride bought and slowly starved, and had sworn it would never be her. She had been right to refuse him. She repeated it to herself in the dark, until the words lost their meaning, and still, underneath them, the other thing went on aching, because being right, she was discovering, is a very cold companion to take to bed, for she had not merely refused a duke. She had refused the only man who had ever made her feel entirely alive, who had argued with her as an equal, who had shown her 10,000 books and the loneliness behind them, who had laughed at her worst insult and come back for more. She had refused him, and she had been right to, and the rightness did not touch the loss at all. She had told him she loved him in the same breath in which she sent him away. She had heard herself say it, and now she must live with having said it and meant it, and lost him anyway, and the injustice of it, that she should be punished with heartbreak for the crime of having too much self-respect to be bought, sat on her chest in the dark like a stone. "You did what you had to do," her father said to her, gently, the next morning, finding her red-eyed over an untouched breakfast. He was a mild man, but not a blind one. He had seen a great deal from the pulpit in 30 years. "I will not tell you that you were wrong, B. I think you were right. A marriage that begins with one soul grateful and the other condescending is a slow poison, and you are far too good for slow poison. But I will tell you one thing, from an old man who has buried a good many people and married a good many more." He covered her ink-stained hand with his own. "Being right and being happy are not always the same road, and the wise thing, the truly wise thing, not the merely proud thing, is to know which one you are on, and why, and whether you could bear the other. You refused him for a good reason. Make certain, my dear, that the reason is large enough to keep you warm for the rest of your life, because you may have just handed that life its shape. That is all. I say no more. Eat your breakfast. You have grown too thin for a bride and too thin for a spinster both, and one way or another we must feed you." Beatrice did not eat her breakfast, but she thought about what her father had said, all through the long, bright, brittle fortnight that followed, in which she smiled too much, and slept too little, and told everyone she had never been better. And slowly, underneath her certainty, a small, treacherous question began to grow. She had been right to refuse the proposal he had made. Of that she had no doubt. But had she, in her pride, closed the door so hard that she had made it impossible for him ever to make a better one? Had she demanded a thing, to be asked as an equal, that a man raised as he had been raised, simply did not know how to give, and then punished him for the failing, before he had been given any chance to learn? She did not know. She only knew that she had begun, in the small hours, to hope, against her own good sense, against everything she had sworn, that he might, somehow, find a way to ask her again. And she despised herself for the hope, and could not put it down, and that, she thought bitterly, was the true cost of loving someone. That even your pride, your last and hardest possession, would betray you in the dark and leave you listening for a knock at the door. He did not sleep. He did not, in fact, sleep well for a fortnight, during which the district, which had confidently expected an engagement, instead observed that the Duke of Ravensworth had gone very quiet, and that Miss Thorne had grown very bright and brittle, and that the two of them, when unavoidable social occasions flung them together, now spoke to each other with a stiff, cold courtesy, far more painful to witness than any of their old arguments. Old Mrs. Bellingham, watching, shook her head. "The great fool has done it wrong," she said. "I said he would marry her or be a fool. I did not think he would contrive to do both. But the Duke of Ravensworth, for all his pride, was not, as Mrs. Bellingham had said, ultimately, a stupid man. He was a proud man who had been badly brought up and never once corrected, and there is a great difference between a fool and a clever man who has never been taught. And the difference is this: the clever man, once he is finally taught, can learn. And Beatrice Thorne had taught him. She had told him the exact truth about himself twice now, once about his cruelty at the first dinner, and once about his pride on the terrace. And the Duke of Ravensworth spent his sleepless fortnight doing the thing he had never in his life been made to do, which was to sit with a hard truth about himself until he understood it all the way to the bottom. And when he understood it, truly understood it, not as a wound to his pride but as a fact about the man he had been and no longer wished to be, he did not send a letter, and he did not summon her, and he did not arrive in his grand carriage to make another grand offer. He had learned that much. Instead, on a gray November morning, the Duke of Ravensworth walked, on foot, alone, 3 miles down the muddy lane to the vicarage. And he knocked on the door like an ordinary man, and he asked the astonished maid whether Miss Thorne would consent to see him. And he waited, hat in hand, in the cold little hall, for her answer, fully prepared to be turned away, and knowing he would deserve it. Beatrice came down. She stood on the stairs and looked at him, the great Duke of Ravensworth, mud to the knees, hatless, in her father's shabby hall, looking as though he had not slept in a fortnight, which he had not. "You walked," she said. "I did not want the carriage," he said. "The carriage is the Duke. I did not come as the Duke. I came as—" He stopped and started again, and she watched him struggle to find words that were not armored, and it was the struggle itself, more than any word, that began to undo her. "I came as a man who has been a fool, to a woman who was kind enough to tell him so, to ask whether she will let him try again, properly, this time, knowing he has no right to ask, and that she may very well say no, and that if she does, he will have earned it." "Say what you came to say," Beatrice said. Her voice was not steady. "But say it correctly, or do not say it at all." "I meant what I said on the terrace. I will not be any man's favor, not even yours." The Duke of Ravensworth set his hat down on the little hall table, and then, in the vicarage hall, in his ruined boots, in front of the gaping maid and the vicar who had appeared in his study doorway, the most feared man in 3 counties went down on one knee on the cold stone floor before a penniless spinster, and he did the thing he should have done on the terrace, and he did it right. "Beatrice Thorne," he said, "I have no favor to offer you. I have nothing to overlook, because there is nothing about you that requires overlooking. You are the most complete equal I have ever met, in mind, and in spirit, and in worth. And it is I who am unworthy of you, not the reverse. And I have spent a fortnight learning it. I am not marrying down. There is no down. There is only you, the finest person I have ever known, and me, a proud, lonely fool, who has loved you since you told me my soup was cold, and I laughed for the first time in 10 years. I am not conferring anything. I am asking. I am asking because I cannot imagine the rest of my life without your voice in it, telling me when I am wrong, and your mind beside mine, and your hand in mine, for as many years as you will grant me. I have no rank in this hall, Beatrice. I laid it in the lane with the carriage. There is only a man on his knees who loves you, and knows he does not deserve you, and is asking anyway, humbly, hopelessly, whether you might, someday, if I spend every day earning it, consent to love him back. Will you? Not the Duke. Me. Will you have me? Beatrice Thorne came down the last of the stairs very slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, the arrogant, brilliant, badly brought-up man she had told she pitied, kneeling in the mud of her father's hall with every scrap of his pride laid down, asking her as an equal at last. And she felt the whole hard armor she had built around her hope crack clean through, because this was the thing she had refused on the terrace, and would never have dared to hope she might be offered instead. Not a rescue, but a partnership. Not a favor, but a plea. Not a duke conferring, but a man asking. "You walked 3 miles in the mud," she said, and her voice broke entirely, "and knelt on a stone floor in front of my father's maid, to ask a spinster to marry you, as though she were doing you the honor." "She would be," the Duke said. "She would be doing me the very greatest honor of my life. I am entirely in earnest, Beatrice. Do not, I beg you, tell me my soup is cold. I do not think I could survive it twice." And Beatrice Thorne began to laugh and to cry, exactly as she had made him laugh at that first dinner, the two undone together, and she sank down onto the cold stone floor with him, careless of it, so that they were kneeling face to face in the shabby little hall, and she took his face in her ink-stained hands. "Yes," she said, "you impossible, arrogant, teachable man. Yes, I will have you, not the Duke. You. God help me, I have wanted to have you since the salt." The engagement of the Duke of Ravensworth to Miss Beatrice Thorne was announced within the week, and it divided the county precisely along the line that such things always divide a county. The kind were delighted, and the ambitious were appalled. Chief among the appalled was the Duke's aunt, the Dowager Lady Ravensworth, a magnificent and terrifying old woman who had spent a decade trying to marry her nephew to one heiress or another, and who descended upon the district within a fortnight of the announcement with the express intention of putting a stop to the whole absurd business. She informed her nephew, secured for him at various times the hand of a marquis's daughter, a nabob's heiress, and a young lady with £100,000 and a squint, and he had refused them all, and now she was informed that he proposed to throw himself away on a penniless clergyman's spinster, with a sharp tongue and no breeding to speak of, and she had come to see the creature for herself, and to bring her nephew to his senses. "You will not bring me to my senses," the Duke said, "because I have only just found them, after 35 years of doing without. But you may certainly meet her, aunt. I insist upon it. I think you will find it instructive." The meeting was arranged as a dinner, and the county, which had not enjoyed itself so thoroughly since the affair of the pity, waited breathlessly to hear how the penniless vicar's daughter would fare against the most formidable dowager in 3 shires. The betting, in the district's discreet way, ran heavily in favor of the dowager. The district had not met Beatrice Thorne. The dowager Lady Ravensworth opened her attack over the soup, with the practiced cruelty of a woman who had reduced debutantes to tears for sport, across 40 years of dinner tables. She inquired, sweetly, after Miss Thorne's family, her people, her connections, her portion. She observed that it must be a very great change for Miss Thorne to contemplate a position so far above the one she was born to. She wondered aloud whether Miss Thorne had considered how difficult she would find it, the managing of a great house, the receiving of great people, when she had been raised in a vicarage on, what was it, £40 a year. She laid it all out, the whole cruel catalogue of Beatrice's smallness, exactly as her nephew once had on the terrace, and she sat back to watch the girl crumble. Beatrice Thorne set down her spoon. "Lady Ravensworth," she said, "I can see that you have come a very long way to be unkind to me, and I would not for the world have you feel your journey was wasted, so let me save us both a great deal of time. You wish to establish that I am poor, unconnected, and beneath your nephew. I am. I concede all of it without a struggle. My father is a country parson. My portion is negligible, and there is not a drop of noble blood in my body. If those facts constitute an argument against the marriage, then the argument is unanswerable, and you have won, and you may go home content." She smiled, the bright, dangerous smile her father dreaded. "But I do not think those are your real objection, and I think you know they are not. Because if rank and fortune were what made a marriage happy, madam, then every titled heiress in England would be blissful, and you and I both know that a great many of them are perfectly miserable, married to men who valued their portions and despised their persons. You did not come here because you fear I am too poor to make your nephew happy. You came because you fear I will make him happy, and that his happiness will prove you wrong, will prove that the thing you have spent your life trading in, the rank and the money and the suitable connection, was never the thing that mattered at all. That is what you cannot forgive me, not my poverty, my sufficiency. I am poor, madam, and unconnected, and I am none the less entirely enough for your nephew, and I think you have known it since the soup, and I think it is breaking your heart, and I am sorrier for that than you will believe, because it must be a terrible thing to reach the end of a long life and suspect you spent it measuring the wrong things." The dinner table had gone entirely silent. The Duke of Ravensworth was watching his betrothed with an expression of naked adoration that his aunt could not fail to see. And the Dowager Lady Ravensworth, who was, whatever else she was, not a stupid woman, and who had just been told the truth about her own life by a penniless girl with more courage than any duchess she had ever known, stared at Beatrice Thorne for a long, long moment, and then did a thing that startled the entire county when the story got about, as it instantly did. She began, dryly, to laugh. "Well," said the dowager, when she had recovered. "Well, well, well, Julian, you wretched boy, you might have warned me." She looked at Beatrice with something that had, astonishingly, become respect. 40 years, girl, and no one, has ever said such a thing to my face, and lived to finish the sentence. My own son does not dare address me before 11 in the morning, and you have sat there over the soup and told me the truth about my entire existence, correctly, and passed me the salt while you did it." She turned to her nephew. "You are quite right. It is instructive. She is dreadful. She is exactly like you, only cleverer. And she will lead you a merry dance for the next 40 years. And it is precisely what you deserve. And I have not been so entertained since your grandfather died. Marry her at once. And you," she pointed her fork at Beatrice, "will come and stay with me a fortnight after the wedding. And you will tell me the truth about myself every single day, because I find at my age it is the one luxury I have never been able to buy, and I begin to see I have missed it. Now pass me that salt, girl, and let us discuss the wedding, because if it is to be done, it will be done properly, and I know everyone worth inviting, and your dreadful nephew here knows nothing about anything except books." And that was how Beatrice Thorne conquered the last and most formidable objection to her marriage. Not by softening, not by shrinking, but by being, exactly and unrepentantly, the sharp, brave enough in herself woman she had always been, until even the dragon who had come to destroy her surrendered out of sheer admiration. They were married in the little gray church, where Beatrice's father had preached for 30 years, and where Beatrice had sat in the front pew every Sunday of her life believing she would very likely die a spinster in it. Her father performed the ceremony himself, his voice unsteady with joy, and the whole district crowded in to see the vicar's clever daughter feud. They were married in the little gray church where Beatrice's father had preached for 30 years, and where Beatrice had sat in the front pew every Sunday of her life, believing she would very likely die a spinster in it. Her father performed the ceremony himself, his voice unsteady with joy, and the whole district crowded in to see the vicar's clever daughter become the Duchess of Ravensworth. And the Dowager Lady Ravensworth sat in the front pew and wept and pretended she was not weeping and threatened the footman who dared to notice. But the wedding, splendid as it was not the thing Beatrice remembered ever afterward as the true beginning of her marriage. That had come the night before, quietly, when the Duke had walked once more down the muddy lane to the vicarage, on foot, as he now always came, having given up the grand carriage for good where she was concerned, and had asked to speak with her alone in the little garden, and had taken both her hands. "I have been thinking," he said, "about the word you used, that first night on the terrace, equal, and about how easy it is to say a woman is one's equal, and how much harder to live it, when the law and the world and every custom of our rank will conspire, every day, to make you small and me large. The money will be mine, the house will be mine, the title will be mine, the world will bow to me and merely tolerate you, and it will offer me 1,000 small chances to forget you are my equal and treat you as a possession, as I very nearly did on that terrace." He tightened his hands on hers. "So, I want to make you a promise that is not in the vows, that I will fight it, that when the world tries to make you small, I will make you large, that your voice in our house will weigh exactly as much as mine, not as a favor I grant, but as a right you hold, and that I will never again reach for my rank to win an argument between us, because a man who loves an equal does not pull rank on her, and if I ever forget it, I will tell you your soup is cold," Beatrice said. "You will tell me my soup is cold," he agreed gravely, "and I will listen and put it down. That is the marriage I am offering you, Beatrice. Not a rescue, a partnership of two difficult, clever people who will argue about everything until we die, and be understood, both of us, for the first time in our lives, every day of it. Will that do? It is all I have." And Beatrice Thorne, who had spent 26 years believing a woman like her must choose between her pride and her happiness, and who had refused a duke rather than surrender the one for the other, discovered in that dark garden that she was to be given both at once, and she put her arms around the neck of the man she loved and wept for pure astonished joy. "It will do," she said. "Oh, you maddening man, it will do very well." The marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Ravensworth became, in time, one of the wonders of the county, not for its grandeur, though it had grandeur, but for the thing everyone remarked on, and no one could quite account for, that after 10 years, and after 20, the Duke and Duchess still argued at the dinner table, like two people who had met that morning, and could not get enough of each other's minds. They argued about the estate, which they ran together, the Duchess having a better head for the accounts than any steward, and the Duke having the sense to know it. They argued about the schools she built, and the cottages he mended, about Bonaparte, and the Corn Laws, and whether Miss Austen would be read in 50 years. They argued about their 4 children, all alarmingly clever, all raised by the explicit and unshakable policy of both parents, to believe that a mind was a mind, whether it belonged to a duke or a dairymaid, and that the worst sin a Ravensworth could commit was to use rank or money to make another soul small. And the district, which had once bet heavily against Beatrice Thorne, came to understand what old Mrs. Bellingham had seen from the very first, that the two of them had saved each other, that the loneliest, most feared man in 3 counties had been dying, slowly, inside the walls of his own consequence, starved for one honest voice, and that a penniless spinster had walked into his life and told him she pitied him, and thereby given him the one thing all his money could never buy, which was to be seen, and challenged, and loved as a man, rather than feared as a duke, and that she, in turn, who had resigned herself to a small gray life of dependence and wit, had been recognized at last, mind and spirit and worth, by the one man in England clever enough to know what she was. Late in that long, happy marriage, when they were both gray, a young and very earnest niece of the Duchess's asked her aunt how she had done it, how a poor girl with no fortune had won the greatest match in the county. She had plainly hoped for a secret, some art, some strategy. The Duchess of Ravensworth set down her book and considered. "I told him the truth," she said at last. "When everyone else in his life told him only what he wished to hear, or was too frightened to withhold, I told him the truth about himself, to his face, and did not soften it, and did not care that he was a duke. That is the whole secret, my dear, and it is not much of one, and I will tell you the hard part, which no one mentions." She smiled, the old, bright, dangerous smile, undimmed by 40 years. To tell a person the truth, you must first respect them enough to believe they can bear it, and love them enough to risk that they will hate you for it. Most people never dare. They call the not daring kindness, but it is usually only cowardice, in kindness's coat. Your uncle had been surrounded his whole life by that kind of cowardice, and it had very nearly killed him. I loved him too much to be a coward. That is all. I told him his soup was cold. She picked her book back up. And reader, I married him. Across the room, the Duke of Ravensworth, who had of course been listening, as he always listened, to every word his wife said, looked up from his own book and met her eyes, the way he had first met them over a little silver dish of salt a lifetime ago. "Your soup," he observed mildly, "is going cold now, my love. You have been talking instead of eating." "I am aware of it," said the Duchess. "I have been talking to a purpose. Some things are worth a cold soup." "Yes," said the Duke of Ravensworth, and there was nothing cold in him at all, and had not been for 40 years. "Yes, I have found them so." He always listened to every word his wife said, looked up from his own book and met her eyes, the way he had first met them over a little silver dish of salt a lifetime ago. "Your soup," he observed mildly, "is going cold now, my love. You have been talking instead of eating." "I am aware of it," said the Duchess. "I have been talking to a purpose. Some things are worth a cold soup." "Yes," said the Duke of Ravensworth, and there was nothing cold in him at all, and had not been for 40 years. "Yes, I have found them so."